is us, Tom and Alice, back. This is a special edition of the Burn Barrel podcast. We're going to try to do one of these every week, maybe, which is largely an in-depth conversation with interesting people, and we've got just that for today. Her name is Iona Italia. She's a very eclectic woman, and she is just great to talk to. Great sense of humor. I'm very intimidated by her, Alice, because I've been looking subsequently on Twitter, and she's like made this meal that's got like hearts of pear and peach, the bolognese with. It's very posh. She lives a very cool and posh life, and I want us to be like Iona Italia.
I know. We need to pick up tips.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's an amazing person. I became aware of her because...
My Jerry Callahan t-shirt, by the way.
Oh, I'm wearing my Jerry Callahan t-shirt, too. There's only 2 days left, by the way, for the introductory 15% off for the first 2 weeks. So if
Who makes those decisions, Alice? Is there a e-commerce manager somewhere that I don't know about?
So it's like the store thing. I can like turn discounts on and off, but it's like limited how much I can do them.
Indulge our gimmick.
It's limited how much I can because the store is already like built out.
The shirts are cool. I'm very pleased with the shirts.
The shirts are cool.
Okay, so how did you find Iona Italia?
So I became aware of Iona Italia because she does work with, do you remember the thing with the studies that they got submitted, all the woke studies, and they submitted them to a bunch of journals and they made it in even though they were totally made up? So the people who did that, one of them, Helen Pluckrose, does this like magazine, Areo magazine, and Iona Italia is the sub-editor of it. She's like the copy editor and all this stuff. But I started following her on Twitter, and she's just like super interesting. She always tweets interesting stuff. And so I saw she has this podcast called Two for Tea, and she interviews interesting people about stuff. It's like very sort of intellectual, and it's really cool.
I found her to be the person that you want to be like placed with at a seated dinner.
Right.
You want to be at the table where she is because it's interesting. It's slightly mischievous. You would it say the word
mischievous?
Please? Yes. Okay. And she's cool. So before we get there this week, the latest thing you just told me before we went on. Obviously, this week the Capitol siege of the Capitol by. Chaka from Land of the Lost and a band of hobbits and some Q morons and some other people where a cop tragically died, where a rioter was shot and killed. That is the big news. Continues to reel. I think Trump at this point is finito and should go. I think Alice, you're there too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I need him to be totally purged from every instance of culture where he exists. So,
agreed.
I mean, saw a thing that they're going to digitally remove him from Home Alone 2.
I'm not sure. Ridiculous.
I'm not sure that's necessary.
Ridiculous. To their credit, though, the ACLU today said that it was no good that he was being banned from Twitter and other social media.
But it turns out that even though this news hadn't happened yet when we had this interview, this is really timely because one of the things she talks about, and one of her issues that she talks about a lot, is free speech. And she said, she's been a Labour Party member. She lives in England her whole life, and she's never voted for a Tory, but that she wants to know what people think, and that, you can't, by blocking access to the things people think, make them think something different. You can't, and how dangerous it is in the world, the idea that we're trying to like block out ideas that we don't like instead of engaging with them and talking to people about them.
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of criticism on social media for some of the stuff that we've written, which is condemning Trump and saying that he has to go, yada, yada, and that stuff. And we'll get to that stuff. And I had a long phone call today with a friend and listener to the show, an old friend of mine, my oldest friend, who wanted to take me to task. And we had a really good conversation. And I've really had a realization. Not a realization. I saw another way of thinking about it that I think is going to be the problem here. And I think, and I'll just tell you what, in summation, it's this. And we're going to do a show tomorrow, which is technically Sunday.
Be meatier, yeah.
And in that, please remind me to get into this conversation, to tell you what we talked about. But in summation, those of us condemning Trump and condemning the whole thing and saying that he's got to go and this is not acceptable,
Right.
we think that we must do that because you need to fix the institutions and you need to repair the damage for when the world goes back to being normal.
Mm-hmm.
We assume that we're going to have normalcy again, and when we do, we're going to have these norms and these standards of behavior, etc. And so we're saying that's why Trump should be sanctioned in whatever way.
Yeah, I mean, so there's
so what I'm saying is, but the guy I talked to today, he's mad, and he's saying that no, you can't, you can't have this judgment on Trump right now because all it does is reinforce all of the attacks on him forever, and it does no good to censure Trump on this stuff right now because we're never going back to the way it used to be. And the game is on, and it's the end game, maybe, of how this country used to be, and you must charge on. And I thought that is a prevalent way to think about it. That is happening. People are there.
Right.
He's not alone. There are millions of people who feel that way.
Right. I mean, that's true, and I get it, but I just don't feel like we have a president right now. And I would prefer us to have a president. I mean, like, do we have to start with being in the middle of the apocalypse right now because, like, Trump won't get out of bed? And
well, I think he's getting out of bed, but
I don't know. I mean, and you had told me, like, I don't think they should use the 25th Amendment because he's not really incapacitated or whatever. But if you had a president who was, like, say, depressed or something and they still wanted to be president, but they, like, say, weren't getting out of bed or didn't want to see briefings, like, I just think he's not really present, and I would prefer to have a president who's, like, I didn't really mind Trump as president that much when he was actually being president for the most part. Like, I thought he did a decent job, but he's not, and it wasn't even so much, I'm not even about, like, him inciting the violence or whatever. Like, I don't think his tweets incite violence. That's just not, I think our standard for speech that incites violence should be really, really high. But I'm more annoyed at the mishandling of the response to whatever happened on Wednesday, and I'm annoyed at his lack of him not showing up to do something about it at the time.
Right, I think we agree on that, and we'll get into more of that.
And so,
let's get into more of that.
Yeah,
expound on
we'll
that
talk
tomorrow.
More about it tomorrow.
When we take the deep dive into the issue. Right now, enjoy and experience the eclectic and thoroughly interesting and pleasant Iona Italia. So we are thrilled to be talking to Iona Italia. She's a writer, and an editor for Areo. She's also a host of the podcast Two for Tea. She's author of Anxious Employment and Our Tango World, and she's currently working on a book, The Half Castes, which is about mixed race identities, and we're going to talk about that in just a bit. But before we get to it, Iona, is Parliament under siege as well, or is it just us stateside who are and are going fierce attack?
No, the situation here is the usual snafu. Am I permitted to swear on this?
Yes, go right
podcast?
ahead.
Sure, yeah,
absolutely. Especially this
situation normal, all fucked up. So there's no siege. We are. Oh, wait 1 second. I don't have my glasses on. Why do I not have my glasses on?
No problem. That's my life story, is looking for my glasses and wondering why I don't have them on. And I celebrated
when you're already wearing them. Yes. I was thinking, it's funny, you're a little bit out of focus, but now I realize why. Yeah, we're on lockdown number 3. So we've been under COVID restrictions more or less since early March. And this is our 3rd big lockdown, like everything is shut. Stay-at-home orders and all that.
So that's very interesting. Obviously, stateside here, Donald Trump was very anti-lockdown. He was anti-COVID altogether. But it seems like, from what I'm reading about over there, that Boris Johnson is aggressively. I don't know if he's pro-lockdown, but certainly he's aggressively kind of pushing those measures.
Yes, he is. So we don't really have. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism of the way Boris has handled things. I don't want to get into the details of that, but I would say that we don't have a leftist pro and rightist anti kind of partisan political division on the lockdown thing. I think I don't know. I mean, I don't have any stats on how many people are pro and anti lockdown, but I would say that Boris has pursued a pretty stringent and at times draconian lockdown policy.
So that's very interesting. That I mean, we absolutely here stateside immediately politicized the coronavirus, and
Of course,
Like we
why
do
not?
everything.
but I would think that over there with Brexit, still still a hot button issue that that people would run to their tribes as soon as possible, and that really hasn't happened.
I think that I feel that it's happened surprisingly little. I actually think that lockdown has. I feel that in the UK the COVID has surprisingly united us, considering how bitter the divisions over Brexit have been, and considering that Brexit is happening right now,
Right.
as we speak. But nevertheless, I think that, you turn on the news every night and people are at home. So they're watching the 9 o'clock and the 10 o'clock news on BBC. And every night it's like an address from the monarch or something. Every night you see Boris sitting in 10 Downing Street talking to the nation. And I do feel, even though I am I'm no longer paid up and card carrying, but I used to actually be a paid up card carrying member of the Labour Party. And I have never voted Tory, and I'm not a fan of Boris's. I actually find him kind of I find him quite a reassuring presence during this year.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because he's somebody who just optically looks chaotic. He's got his, but that he's calming. I guess that's good. I'm happy to hear it. So just going off of the news this week, obviously in the U.S. this has been crazy, and our Congress is attacked. A policeman dies. A woman is shot dead. One of the protesters. And it's just a tragic and sad thing for us. To me, it's not on the scale of 9/11 at all, but it hurts in the same place that 9/11 did here. But immediately now, on social media, people are going right back to their sides and using it as a cudgel to beat each other,
Right.
as if our democracy wasn't under attack. Is that because we're just incredibly resilient, or are we the biggest bunch of holes on the planet?
Well, maybe a bit of both. I think that, I feel that up until now, Trump has been a stress test for U.S. democracy. And I think he's been the most divisive president that I have ever seen. I've almost never seen him addressing the nation kind of as a nation, being the president for all Americans, almost always just talking to his base, and in a very inflammatory way, in a way that just heats tempers and makes people more divided. And up until, was it yesterday that it happened, or the day before? Was it yesterday? I've lost track of time.
Yesterday was the latest outrage, but 2 days ago was the attack in the Congress, I think.
Okay, day before, yeah. It was kind of late-ish at night here after dinner, day before yesterday, yeah. Up until that point, I thought that the US democracy was passing that test with flying colors. And now I'm a bit more anxious. I think what I realized yesterday is how important it is not just for elections to be free and fair, but for them to be perceived to be free and fair. So the really dangerous thing about Trump's presidency has been the way that he has undermined people's faith in the democratic process. And that's very troubling to me. I don't think he's actually done that much stuff. He didn't drop a nuclear bomb on North Korea. He didn't, I don't feel that very many programs were enacted during his time in office. There are not many kind of actual policies that I feel concerned about, but I'm just concerned about the way that he has just undermined people's faith in democracy.
Yeah, there's
And I think that was the fruits of that the other day.
Right. And I think that another thing about it that really made an impression on me, and we've seen this in the US a little bit over the summer too, with some of the protests that kind of devolved into riots during the course of this year as well, is that it's like a little window into what life can be like if you can't figure out how to solve your differences by talking about them and voting on them. And it's sort of a disturbing picture. And I'm concerned about the people who don't seem that disturbed by it, who are going like, well, that's what democracy is. Sometimes it's messy. And I'm thinking, no, this isn't a healthy way to solve problems. And that once you decide you have no other choice but to handle things this way, things can go wrong very quickly. Everything, it's all a peaceful protest until it's not a peaceful protest, and people are dead because of that. And I think that the people sort of cheerleading the continuing divisions, I don't know if they just don't see it, that this can get worse from here, and that means, more people will be hurt and more people's lives will be put in danger. But, I think people take stability for granted, and it was kind of scary how quickly and how easily the Capitol building of the United States can just be overrun by people who I don't think were a serious insurrection attempt, people who were really just violent yahoos who were fairly disorganized and were able to get that far into the Capitol and it caused people to lose their lives over it. It's somewhat shocking to me.
It's absolutely extraordinary to me that, well, I think Thomas Jefferson Williams put it the most eloquently when he said a young woman gave her life for Donald Trump. I mean, it's so, I can't stop thinking about this woman, and I feel really deep pity for her. And I think that I have been seeing among people who I follow on Twitter mostly, not so much among real life friends, but partly I haven't really seen many real life friends because we haven't been allowed to see our friends for so long. But on Twitter, I've been seeing people radicalizing before my eyes, basically since the election. I think that I saw the left sort of radicalizing after Trump's election first, after his I was about to say his first election, his only election victory in 2016, and really doubling down on their kind of really doubling down on the ultra woke and the identity politics stuff, which I personally find quite toxic in most of its manifestations, in an understandable kind of response to Trump's election, which seemed to confirm all their worst fears about the right. And now I am around this new election, I've been seeing a lot of kind of centrist and previously kind of more classically liberal or right-wing, but more just ordinary, thoughtful, ethical conservatives, just radicalizing into these MAGA chuds before, I can kind of chart their progress day by day. It's been really extraordinary. And suddenly people are sharing, not quite QAnon. I haven't actually seen anybody that I know sharing QAnon kind of stuff, but really conspiratorial things about the vaccine and about the elections being stolen. Those are the most, I was watching the election very carefully. Those are the most transparent. I think you have the most transparent electoral process of any country, because I found out quite a lot about it in the course of this last election.
Right. The whole world has to know the inner details of Cook County election ballot counting procedures.
And you're right, Iona, and that we made fun of. We're conservatives, but it's complicated conservatives. But we made fun of in 2004 the left for going on and on about Diebold voting machines and their conspiracy theories, and had a good laugh. And in even 2016, after Trump won, suddenly it was the end of the world. Everybody needed therapy dogs on the left, and we've laughed and kvetched at all their hyperventilation. Now my side, the right, has done the exact same thing, and we're on about Dominion voting machines. Now we've lost our minds, and why are we? I mean, why are we so damn weak?
The island of sanity is getting narrower and narrower.
But what is that? Is it simply the social media, do you think, or is this? Do we not have the mental constitution to deal with events that really shouldn't be considered that big?
I don't even know that it's social media. I mean, I think social media is a force magnifier of whatever else happens to be going on. It's just, I think social media is just a microphone. Whatever you're saying is going to be louder, rather than it's shifting people in a specific direction. I actually think Twitter can be quite good for challenging people's opinions. I know people silo themselves off in Twitter by muting and blocking and choosing who to follow and all of that. But I like the fact that on Twitter you can post, as somebody said the other day, you can post on there, "The sky is blue." And someone will respond, "This idiot has never heard of nighttime." I think that is actually very useful. That when you're on Twitter, you know that whatever you say is liable to be questioned. I think that's actually quite good. That's probably
and from
quite
all
a good
sides too.
thing about it. But
it's interesting.
I don't know how much is the pandemic, because I think the pandemic has really affected people psychologically. Although it should by rights have affected us more, because we have been under much more lockdown. And that is definitely still continuing. And the latest thing, and my source here is the BBC News at 10, as I'm not quoting some conspiratorial little website, is that it is not known how effective the vaccine will be against the new strain.
Oh, great.
That is really bad news.
Although I did see I did see one story, maybe it was today, that they were saying that they did have some evidence against the UK strain that it's still pretty effective, but they're not sure yet. They need more study to determine the South Africa strain. They don't know about that one. And the truth is, and I hadn't really thought about this before, that the more the virus spreads around, the more it's liable to mutate, and the more likely that we will end up with something that isn't controllable by this vaccine. But I don't know.
Although viruses do tend to mutate into more into more contagious but less serious forms. So, there could be an end game in which everybody just gets COVID all the time, and it's like a cold. It's like your seasonal cold. But I don't think we can stay in lockdown until then.
Right.
I don't think that's imminent. But what do I know? I'm not an epidemiologist.
Right.
But I do think there's kind of a strain on people. Most people are really feeling the financial pinch. Even if they're not, even in countries where they're not in lockdown, just people are not going out to eat and to shop. And they did the studies in Sweden where they had no lockdown, and nevertheless their economy was tanking because people voluntarily stayed home because they didn't want to catch it. So the virus itself deterred them without the government even needing to put the regulations in place. So that's a strain on people. And then also, we don't have our usual outlets, and I am very lucky to live with people I really like, but I can't imagine if I didn't like them, Because I have seen no one except my flatmates. I think I've seen people other than my flatmates in person, like maybe 5 or 6 times since early March.
Wow. So are you not going out of the house at all?
We're going out of the house. I go for walks and to run every day.
Okay.
But that's pretty much it. Because we're not supposed to take public transport except in emergency. We don't have a car here. So the restrictions have varied over the course of the year. A few times they were relaxed for a little while, but it's been quite short spurts of relaxed.
So, related to that, is that why? So, in the summer, the George Floyd murder happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the middle of the country. We're here on the east coast of the country in Boston, Massachusetts, and we also here had a cultural revolution where all the statues had to go down, and we had, even though we don't have the same policing problem in Boston as they do in the middle of the country. And I turn on the TV, and in London, you're having George Floyd protests, and I would think that you're even less culpable in the murder of George Floyd than we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And our police aren't even armed.
Right, I saw that they were running away from the mob at times. Is that a matter of like the normal drunken louts who go out and get soused watching Manchester United not being able to do that anymore, or was it? Go ahead.
I think not. I mean, in some cases, maybe, but we didn't really have rioting. We just had big protests. There were a few marginal incidents, and there were 2 police officers who were injured. But it was mostly not rioting. It was mostly just straight protesting, which was illegal here. So unlike your government, our government did say you're not allowed to go to protests, right. Which seems to be very sensible, frankly. I was very unpopular on Twitter for opposing the protests because on balance, I just think you shouldn't be protesting during en masse during a pandemic. But I don't have I don't have a strong stance on that. I err on that side of things. But certainly, I really don't think people should have been protesting in the UK for the same reasons, because we have less reason to protest, and also we also have 60,000 deaths per week or whatever it is at the moment. Not deaths, sorry, cases per week. Yeah, I mean, the US way of looking at things is just, the US framework has just been imposed lately on the entire world.
Right.
And I have noticed among my UK friends, I've noticed people talking about other people's race way more than I have ever heard in my life. So every issue has become a race issue. So suddenly, instead of, it's thoughtless of those people to park here in the disabled parking spot or whatever it is, it's white people are parking in the disabled parking spot. These f***ing white people are, behaving badly. And I'm also hearing some quite dodgy things said about Black people. And it's really, it's not that people have become more racist. It's just that this sort of constant consciousness of people's race is just really not healthy. Doesn't make for a healthy attitude and interactions between people. And I have noticed just every problem is immediately rephrased as a race problem. Immediately it's what percentages of white people does this affect versus Black people? And Black people aren't even our largest ethnic minority, but the US discourse is about white versus Black. And we seem to have really adopted that discourse wholesale. And I wish we wouldn't.
No, same here. And over here, it's really woke white middle class people who are the loudest about this.
Yeah. Well, I did hear that Black Americans are more likely to be conservative are more likely to be kind of socially, culturally conservative because more of them are religious believers proportionally, but they don't vote Republican because the Republicans are seen as a racist party, and probably more of them would if that weren't the case, if they could lose that reputation. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems to me to be really the wrong way of approaching our very real social problems.
And it's interesting to me that at a time when this discourse has become so prevalent in the United States, and this sort of like woke racializing of everything that happens, Donald Trump, who's perceived on the left as being uniquely racist, also got higher percentages of Black and minority votes in the United States than any Republican has in memory, and higher than he did in the previous election. So it's sort of this odd dichotomy between, kind of getting at what Tom was saying, is it's not even really, minorities and people of color who have really mainstreamed this discourse. It's a lot more sort of almost a class thing. Like it's the sort of upper class white liberals in a lot of cases who've made this a big thing. And, the area of the country where we happen to live, we live in these kind of predominantly white suburbs. And, we see so much of it. They're having protests, in a town that's like 97% white. They're having a Black Lives Matter protest and all going out there and doing a fist like they're in the Black Power movement. And this whole, it's very sort of odd to me, and it's not being generated from the Black community. So much of it seems to be coming from like college educated liberals.
And in fact,
to be fair though, to be fair, I would expect college educated people to be the most kind of interested in political movements in general, and I would expect white people to be the largest contingent just because America is a majority white country. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But and there are obviously Black people who are also on board with it. And I don't mind that so much. I think it's okay to be concerned about racism, or it's okay to take any political stance, doesn't matter what your skin color is, including a Black Lives Matter stance, despite the fact that all of you are white. Or what I dislike is I don't like the bean counting thing, which is okay, so we have a problem here that we need more affordable housing, let's say. So let's tackle that problem and think about how to create more affordable housing. And instead we're talking about how more Black people than white people live in poor quality housing, and therefore this is all about systemic racism. I don't find that helpful. It may be helpful for sociologists to have those kinds of statistics, and it's helpful to track to see whether the policies that you institute are actually helping the people you want to help, which is something politicians, by the way, almost never do. They don't have an experiment and a control and see which works and which doesn't. No, it's just like, this is gonna work. I'm crossing my fingers here. Yes, it is. Pinky swear. Let's go. That drives me crazy. But it's just, why must everything be a conversation about racism? Why can't we tackle the material circumstance of people's lives and just say we're going to help the people who are in need? If that disproportionately helps Black people because more of them are in need, that's absolutely 100% fine with me. But I find this obsession with race really damaging, and I think it also blinds us to other factors. So during this attack on the Capitol, I was hearing a lot of people framing it as white people have invaded the Capitol and Donald Trump has done nothing to stop them because they're white. And as my friend Jay Shapiro said recently, imagine if, let's say in some counterfactual universe, Candace Owens had been leading this protest with a bunch of black people in the MAGA hats with their Blacks for Trump thing.
Right.
Would Donald Trump have then sent in the National Guard and tried to stop them? Would he have behaved differently? No, I think he would have been even more delighted because the optics would have been so
Right.
good, or so confusing to the woke. And it's not white people fighting black people. It's politics. It's politics. It's people who support Trump
Yep.
and people who don't support Trump. And this has been Trump's thing all along. His dividing people into his supporters and his enemies has been his stock in trade before he was even elected. I remember this insane speech that I can't remember her full name. Her surname is Omarosa,
Yes.
a black lady who used to work for the Trump team.
Yes.
And she gave this astounding speech where she said, when Trump gets into power, he is going to be the most powerful man on the planet, and he is going to take revenge on all of his enemies. Right from the beginning, it was framed in this extraordinarily divisive way. Not that the left also did some divisive stuff. So Hillary's stuff about the basket of deplorables, the way in which Hillary talked about the American electorate, I thought was just disgusting, really disgusting. You don't demonize voters like that. You have a two-party system, so that means you accept that people disagree, and some people vote for one candidate and some vote for the other. That is how it is. But this is partisan. It's not a war of white against black. It's not a race war.
Yeah, and even it's interesting because even with the Capitol being attacked, the thread through social media was if these had been black protesters, then the police would have really cracked down on them. And this is showing your privilege. This is a good snapshot of how white privilege works. We went right from the Senate being occupied by people dressed like Chewbacca who are ransacking the room, which should be top of mind, to finding a race argument to have.
Yeah, the guy who took the lectern.
Right.
I think this is the only good thing to have come out of it is the Facebook meme of the photo of him with a lectern in his hand, posing at the camera, and it says, "You may not agree with his politics, but you have to respect this guy for taking a stand."
Well, yeah, and it's funny. I mean, the internet has now ID'd him, and a couple of people looked it up, and it's appearing that he's never even actually voted in his life. So he's been registered to vote, but didn't vote.
He was just a hooligan looking for a good time.
It's just people looking for trouble. I don't know. I don't know how it was allowed to happen, but I don't necessarily believe the people who think that if it had been a crowd of black people, it would have been handled that differently. I mean, based on what we saw all year, how things were handled with various protests in the summer. And, like Tom says, kind of to make it about that is so just oddly small-minded. And Trump is like so badly behaved and petty and narcissistic, but then you turn around and somehow like the left manages to also be terrible. I'm like, he's handing you a gift. He's being awful. And, Tom and I would joke about this all the time during the election season. Every time Trump did something so terrible and you would think to yourself, like, can I vote for this person? He's so, and we're conservatives. So we were like, think like, can I vote for him after he said this or did this? And then like the media or the left or, Biden's people would do something else so outrageous that we, oh my goodness, like how can they all be so bad? Like, how can they all be so badly behaved all the time? And
I share your frustration. I think I take a more, I take a more optimistic view of Biden in general than you do. But I am a bit worried about the continuing I'm a little bit worried about continuing partisanship. So I felt recently Biden has been fairly statesmanlike. I thought it was great. He was good during the George Floyd stuff. He was condemning the riots and condemning Antifa activity and all of that. In the kind of dignified being above it all way that you should as the president.
Right.
Because even the people who don't support you, didn't vote for you, don't want you in the White House, have to live under you. You have to, and you have to give them confidence that you're not going to, you're going to represent them as well. And I think he did that well during the summer, but his response to this event kind of dismayed me, because he was citing his granddaughter. I'm sure you saw this, saying that, saying, like, as so many people have been saying, if they had been Black people, it would have been very different. And I felt that was pandering to his base. I thought it was extremely tone deaf. I mean, a lot of people obviously will cheer this but only people who already agree with him, who are already woke and who are already on the left. And your job as president is to get people on board who don't already agree with you, who aren't already on your side. Or it should be your job.
Right.
Well, and it's so interesting because of kind of what you said about how, like, you still have to talk to people. If you're Hillary Clinton, you still have to get people to come on board and vote for you and talk to them and listen to them, even if they wouldn't naturally be on your side first and foremost. And I think that what's so dismaying about kind of everything that's going on, largely in the US, but is kind of being imported to elsewhere in the world, is that people aren't willing to talk or listen to each other anymore. They're just done. And, when that happens, that's when you get things like what we saw on Wednesday, because people just aren't willing to listen and vote and let a political process play out. They're just going to take things into their own hands. And, I don't know what we do about that. It's one reason why I'm so fascinated by, like, your podcast and how you have on these guests who have, really different views or who are talking about issues no one's talking about. And you have these kind of long conversations that are wide ranging. And it's so, I really think we need more of that out there. People talking to each other and listening to each other, and not just in sound bites or, short little 240 character tweets. We need more, kind of conversations where we hear what other people actually think about things,
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, I remember it was just after the 2016 election. I was in the States, and I was invited to dinner at this to a Sunday lunch at the house of parents of a friend of mine. And she said, but you may not want to go because my parents support Trump and they voted for Trump and they're kind of enthusiastic about Trump. And I found, I mean, I understand why she said this, and I thought it was kind of her. It was like she was trying to be thoughtful and kind. But I also think it's sad that you would therefore not want to go, because my feeling was I was very eager to go because I wanted to know, I want to know why people think the way that they think and why they vote the way they vote. There's no way of ever changing things for the better if you don't start from a position of looking clearly at what is actually happening. It's the main reason I believe in free speech, is that if you force people to conceal what they're thinking from you, then you just all you're doing, well, among other things, what you're doing is you're robbing yourself of the possibility of knowing what it is they're thinking. You can make people lie to you very easily. You can just tell them, say these things or else, or, don't say these things or else. But if you do that, you have no idea what's going on. I think I saw this happening not quite as kind of rampantly, but with Brexit. And even Brexit has now recently taken on this kind of race thing that supposedly the Brexit people are racist, etc. Brexit had nothing to do with race. Well, maybe it did for some fringe people, but mostly Brexit had nothing to do with race. What we saw in Brexit was this extremely complicated choice, which should, in my opinion, never have been put to a plebiscite to begin with, but this incredibly complicated economic issue, which most people frankly don't understand. I don't myself understand all the ins and outs of what are the economic advantages, disadvantages of being in Europe, not being in Europe, etc. Then you had a yes/no choice on this highly like complex, nuanced thing, and people immediately started demonizing each other. On both sides, I saw it happening equally on both sides. And my boss Helen Pluckrose had a lot of people just stop being her friends because she voted Remain. So it definitely came from the Brexit side too. Both sides were just utterly demonized the other side for a choice they made on a really nuanced, complex issue that most people didn't even fully understand and didn't even pretend to fully understand. It was just absurd. And that's one of the things that I noticed. The other thing I noticed was I noticed that absolutely nobody on my personal social newsfeed and nobody I knew personally was supporting Brexit. And so lots of people on my newsfeed were saying, well, Brexit's clearly not going to happen because nobody is supporting it. And it's like, this is a big, big mistake that you get into in bubbles. And what happened with one of the things that happened, one of the reasons why, well, I'm not a fan of the Clintons, but also one of the reasons why Hillary's rhetoric was so like sloppy, and one of the reasons why Hillary became the candidate anyway, despite being very unpopular, and despite the fact that since her husband had already been president, lots of people kind of felt like it would be a repeat performance, and they don't like that. One of the reasons it was so sloppy was because people completely underestimated Trump's popularity, and that's because they were so siloed, because nobody they knew was supporting Trump.
Right.
And that seems to have happened. It's maybe forgivable if that happened to you, just you as a private citizen, but it's really unforgivable that that happened on a national level, that they were so up themselves that they kind of didn't notice that not everyone was on their side.
Right, and it also caused them to never reconcile with the loss. So it couldn't be that all these men, it must be because of racism or the Russians or something. So they never reconciled, which now the other side isn't reconciling. You know?
Right, the rallies were huge. We were all out there at the rally. There were so many of us. How could we have lost? It's the same thing that Trump people do.
But this is, and maybe this is what you found or your boss found, is that otherwise lovely people, and in my own world, some women I met when we were all in our early 20s were the most beautiful, elegant, stylish. They just did everything right. Now we're close to 50, and they're now on social media talking about
very, very good age.
Yes, it is a great age. I agree.
So you're younger than me then.
Today's actually Tom's birthday.
Oh, that's right,
he turned 48 today. So.
Happy birthday!
Thank you.
48. Get off my lawn.
So, and these women now are on social media and they're yelling at the Trump-tards and F their feelings and this, and I'm thinking like they would never have imagined themselves being that person. They were they're wonderful, elegant, thoughtful people, but they're just vile on social media, and they feel good about it. It's like there's no introspection left.
Well, we have really valorized sort of emotion. If you feel strong, it seems to be a kind of a false way of thinking that seems to have pervaded a lot of people's minds at the moment, which is if you feel strong emotions about something, then that is a sign that you are in the right about that thing.
Right.
Whereas, if anything, it's often likely to be quite the opposite. And so people are sort of signaling. When I say signaling, I don't mean to imply it's necessarily conscious. I think they really do feel the feelings.
Right.
But those feelings are rewarded, kind of displaying strong emotion is rewarded and is seen as somehow astuteness or as being on the right side of history or as being, and I've noticed that people who don't do that, for example, to take a more extreme example, people who really can't do that, like people who have Asperger's, as they used to call it, high functioning autistic people, who just tend to look at things with this logical analysis and speak their minds very plainly, and don't usually get into this kind of weeping and telling people to f off kind of style of discourse. That many of them are getting demonized for being kind of cold-hearted and for being like not being upset enough. And it's weird.
How interesting. So I want to get to the half casts, but before that, you've got the 2-part book series called Our Tango World. Those are 2 books?
Yes, it's like, so it's a kind of anthology of very short pieces, individual pieces, and then they're separated into 2 little paperback books, which were published by a small independent press.
Okay, so what I want to ask you is, and it's funny because I was thinking about the tango, and to me, the tango is absolutely a simulation of sex. And of course, I look on Amazon now, and you've got actually a chapter on that, saying why we confuse tango with sex. And it might be just that because I'm dumb and a man, that you see the sensuous moves and a woman involved in it, and you think that it looks sexual to me. So why am I wrong?
Yeah, so I think that I mean, there is kind of an obvious way in which it's sexual, and I always joke that our bumper sticker, our tango dancers' bumper sticker would be, tango dancers do it all night long, changing partners every 12 minutes. So we tend to dance in these like 12-minute sets. I think that it's so it's not directly sexual in the sense that, for example, it's very rare to have groin to groin contact. We don't usually have below the waist contact in tango, just because of the way the dance works. And also, I think that to get literally sexually aroused, you usually need. Oh, sorry, your child isn't there.
No,
is he?
he's
No,
gone.
it's okay.
Okay.
They left.
Okay, I can talk about
You
this
never
topic.
know on our podcast, so it's a good question. There's a dog in the room, but that's it.
Okay. Oh, I thought that was your child.
There was a child
There
here
was.
earlier. Now there's a dog.
There was, yes.
It goes back and forth in here.
So cover your dog's ears just in case.
We will.
But when you get, I mean, to get literally sexually aroused, usually you can't be concentrating on something else that takes kind of focus and concentration. So people don't usually get aroused unless they are, able to give over a large part of their brain to the sexual and erotic feelings. And in tango, you are focused on the dance, which requires skill and coordination and listening to the music and other things like that. So I think it's quite rare for people to feel an actual physical arousal during the dance. It does occasionally happen.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
But I think it's for that reason, because so much of your brain is going to, especially for the leader, is going to be negotiating the room, leading the moves, following the moves, focusing on what you're doing dance-wise, keeping being balanced and interpreting the music and various other things which are not directly sexual. And I think the other thing about it is it kind of, so to me it feels, it's both sort of genuine and it's not, the kind of feeling that you have when you're dancing tango. I should also point out that in Argentina, it's a very entrenched part of the culture. So people very frequently dance. You very frequently see parents dancing with children. In fact, it's often
I wish I hadn't asked that question.
Yeah, not young, their own children. Like often, your teenager wants to go to a tango event for the first time, so you go with them and you dance with them. And there are a couple of professional couples also who are brother and sister couples who dance. And certainly people will dance with people they don't find sexually attractive, because they enjoy the feeling of dancing. They enjoy the dancing with them. They enjoy the dance experience. So all of those things take it out of the sexual realm a little bit. And the other thing is that it's not, sex has this kind of teleological thing. So usually it, not always, of course, but usually there's like the beginning arousal, there's kind of build up, and then one or more person or persons has an orgasm or orgasms or whatever. And then there's this period, which I think is technically called the recalcitrance, when you have to rest and you're, I mean, we don't have sex like all day long. Which is good. Well, at the moment, it's probably bad. I mean, if these people had been home having it off, then they wouldn't have stormed the Capitol. So it has advantages and disadvantages. But of course, in tango, it's not like that. You're just you can stay on this even keel of pleasure. You're not aiming towards anything, and you don't come back from the dance and you're like, I need a cigarette now and delight and I'm going to fall asleep. No, you so all those things feel very different from sex. And I think that when it's it feels to me more like the way that we hold each other in tango. And we hold each other in an embrace which is, it's unlike any other partner dance. It's of the partner dances. It's the closest dance hold to a real life hug. So it feels like a hug, and a hug can, of course, feel very sexual and sexy, especially if it's somebody you find attractive is hugging you, and it's a long, sustained hug. But hugs can also have there can be many different feelings that you can have in a hug. You can also just feel warm and affectionate. It can just feel comfortable. It can feel kind of like playful. It's playing together. It can feel kind of reassuring. It's mostly good feelings you have. Occasionally, of course, you end up dancing with somebody and they and they smell bad, or they're uncomfortable, or they're not a good dancer, and you get frustrated with them, and you don't feel terribly comfortable there. But usually, and this again is where for me it really differs from sex, if you're in that situation, you don't usually feel violated. Whereas if you were having sex with somebody you didn't want to be having sex with, that would be a really different feeling. You just think, this is not so great, Right. But it's almost more like something that is kind of, it's like a memory of something. I mean, when you dance, also, context and meaning is really important to touch. So, it means something very different if a lover touches my vulva than if my gynecologist touches my vulva, for example. Even if they touched, well, they obviously don't touch in the same way. I don't want my gynecologist to be struck off the register. But even if at that moment they say touch the same place in some similar way, it's very different, because you know what the purpose of this is and what the meaning is. The meaning makes a lot of difference. And that's true in tango too. So when you're dancing with someone, you take them in your arms, you know that they're not taking you into their arms for sex or for romance, but for dancing.
Is your best tango partner the one with the most acumen, or the one that you're most compatible with?
I think it's both, but a certain level of skill is needed for to become compatible. Usually, tango has quite a steep learning curve at the beginning, so I think at the beginning it's very very hard to find real compatibility with anybody, although you can still find moments of it within the dance. There are moments of kind of rush of really good feeling, and the feeling is one of being heard and understood. I think it's like you're moving together, so it feels really harmonious, and it also feels like they're expressing to you what they're feeling through their movement, and you're expressing what you're feeling. And it feels like a very intimate form of being kind of heard and conversing without words.
How fascinating. And so that is called Our Tango World. And you're working on the half casts right now.
Yes, I have made a little bit of a start on it. I've been starting this book rather slowly. And I actually kind of made a start on it a few years ago, but then I wrote the 2 tango books. I was sort of commissioned to write these tango books, so I did that in the interim. And the half-casts book, what I want to write about is it's modeled on I'm kind of modeling the structure of it on a book which is called Incarnations, India in 50 Lives. I don't know whether I will focus only on India in my book. I'm beginning with Indian examples, but I might make it more international. And what I want to do in each chapter is focus on one person and have a short kind of biography of that person, focusing on the way in which their mixed race identity significantly changed their life. So people for whom their mixed race identity proved to be important to their life in some way, either as a problem or as an opportunity, and probably in most cases as both. And so I hope to make some points about what that might mean, because I think that I see the mixed race thing as really challenging the kind of the orthodox the orthodox kind of racial divisions that we put people in, and as potentially being mixed race gives you an opportunity, if you want to take it, to try to bridge cultures, and so I'm interested in what I want to do is give examples of that through history,
Right.
Told as little biographies rather than writing it as an essayistic book.
Right.
That's the plan.
I love that. And I love, I know I've seen some of the conversations you've had with Thomas Chatterton Williams, who also has a book about kind of challenging this like black, white racial identity thing that seems to be happening in the world. And, we've always had mixed race people in the world, and bridging cultures and talking to each other, and in America even the idea that we're primarily made up of 2 different races, one black and one white, is just not true, and it's ahistorical, and it sort of denies the experiences of people because we're trying to put everything in this box. So I just find this so fascinating, when people who sort of have a foot in 2 races or 2 cultures kind of say, you're not hearing my story, and this is what it is. So it's interesting to me that you sort of have had this idea marinating for a few years, kind of before this became really big, this whole like racial identity thing. But it's more topical than ever, kind of. So I'm really interested to see more.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really the kind of race narrative makes even less sense here than it does in the States, because so statistically, half of all British Black men and 1/3 of Black women are in relationships with non-Black people, mostly with white people. And that is that is a hell of a lot of mixed race children, and also blended families.
Mm-hmm.
I very, very frequently meet people or encounter them online, and the person is Black, for example. So let's take my friend Liam Kofi Bright, who I absolutely adore, who disagrees with me on almost all of this stuff, but that's fine. Liam is a really great guy, and an interesting thinker. But Liam is Black, but his younger brother is white. And I don't even know whether that's because he's mixed race, which he is actually, or because it's a blended family and it's his half or stepbrother or whatever, which is also also very, very frequently the case. So this idea that there's kind of white people here and Black people there, it just does not make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting. And speaking of interesting, Iona Italia, you are a fascinating woman. I can't begin to tell you. You'd be a very intimidating date. You've got such an interesting background, and you're so worldly. Iona Italia is the person who we've been talking to. You should go out and buy Our Tango World. I just saw it on Amazon, so it's there. Look out for the half casts. Check out her work at Areo, Areo. And follow her on Twitter.
And her podcast.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that.
The
Two for Tea.
2 for Tea podcast as well.
I was just listening today. You're talking to a guy about wokeism, and I'm not done with it, actually. And it's at Iona Italia. Iona, thank you so much. I know we took you long, but you're just so fascinating to talk to. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right. That was Iona Italia. What a pleasure to talk to. I could have talked to her for 4 hours. We took longer than we had booked anyway, but she's just an interesting person, and I love the ability. I got to tell you that I only intended to dip into the tango stuff at the end and move right along. Mm-hmm. But she really thought long and deep about it in her answer, her long, her dissertation on the art that is the tango being something far different than simply what I saw it as is it's foreplay essentially. Was very interesting and so thoroughly thought out and so thoughtful. And I liked it. I just love talking to her, and I love that she has got a foul mouth too, Alice. Mm-hmm. So that's my take on it. And hopefully, if she comes stateside, we have to hang out with her.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I would love that.
All right, so that is that. We're going to be back. For us, this is Saturday night. For you, it might be Sunday morning, but if it's you Sunday morning, Sunday midday or afternoon, there'll be another podcast out.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been the Burn Barrel Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Burn Barrel Pod. If you still have the Parler app, if it hasn't been removed from your app store yet, you can find us there at Burn Barrel Podcast. We're at facebook.com/Burn Barrel Podcast. You can email us, burnbarrelpodcast@gmail.com, and you can check out our YouTube channel, Tom Shattuck's Burn Barrel. Like, comment, and subscribe.
C'est la vie.